Now I'm going to go with you through a list of some commonly used phrasal verbs in English language. I'm going to read out the phrasal verb, its meaning, and give you an example or examples for each. And to help you, I've also included the Arabic translation for the phrasal verb so you will remember it more quickly. Now let's start with how you learn some separable phrasal verbs. The first one is blow up. It means explode. Examples: the terrorists tried to blow up the railway station. The second example: a bomb blew up near Oxford Street this morning. Bring up, which means to mention a topic. Example: my mother brought up that little matter of my prison record again. Bring up, which means to raise children. Examples: it isn't easy to bring up children nowadays. Second example: after her parents were killed, the child was brought up by her uncle. Call off. Notice that I'm going through the list in alphabetical order of the most commonly used phrasal verbs in English language. Call off, which means here to cancel. Examples: they called off this afternoon's meeting. The football match was called off because of the bad weather. Do over means to repeat a job. Example: do this homework over. Fill out, which means to complete a form. Example: fill out this application form and mail it in. And the last phrasal verb here is fill up, which means here to fill up to capacity. Example: she filled up the groceries cart with free food. Now the first phrasal verb here is find out, which means to discover, normally to discover information. Example: my sister found out that her husband had been planning a surprise party for her. Give away, which means here to give something to someone else for a free. Examples: the filling station was giving away free gas. When she got older, she gave all her toys away. Next, give back, which means to return an object. Example: my brother borrowed my car. I have a feeling he's not about to give it back. Hand in, which means to submit something or to submit an assignment. Example or examples: the students handed in their papers and left the room. I found a wallet and handed it in to the police. And the third example: she handed in her resignation. Hang up means to put something on hook or receiver. Example: she hung up the phone before she hung up her clothes. Now we've got two different things, and we are using the phrasal verb for two different contexts. Hold up, which means to delay. I hate to hold up the meeting, but I have to go to the bathroom. Next example: we were held up by the traffic. Notice how we use the passive voice here, which means the traffic held us up. So we were held up by the traffic. Now we are still looking at some separable phrasal verbs. The first one on the list here is hold up, which means to rob, normally using or threatening with a gun for the purpose of stealing. Example: 3 masked gunmen held up the Security Bank this afternoon. The next phrasal verb, leave out, means to omit. Example: you left out the part about the police chase down Asylum Avenue. Next phrasal verb is look over, which means to examine, to check. The example: the lawyers looked over the papers carefully before questioning the witness, which means they looked them over carefully. Now notice how we separate the preposition from the main verb. The next phrasal verb is to look up, means to search in a list, normally for information. Example: you have misspelled the word again. You'd better look it up. Notice here that since we are using a pronoun, it, so the phrasal verb cannot be separated. I read that rule to you at the beginning. Make up means to invent a story or to lie. Example: she knew she was in trouble, so she made up a story about going to the movies with her friends. And the last phrasal verb in this slide is make out, which means to hear, to understand. Example: he was so far away we really couldn't make out what he was saying. We couldn't understand what he was saying. We are still on the list of learning some separable phrasal verbs. The first one is pick out, which means to choose. Example: there were 3 men in the lineup. She picked out the guy she thought had stolen her purse. Next phrasal verb is pick up, means to lift something off something else. Examples: the crane picked up the entire house and we watched them pick it up. Lucy picked up the child and gave him a cuddle. And the third example: the phone stopped ringing. The phone stopped ringing just as I picked up the receiver, just as I lifted the receiver. Next phrasal verb is point out, means to call attention to something. Example: as we drove through Paris, Francis pointed out as we drove through Paris, Frank pointed out the major historical cities. Put away means to save or to store. Example: we put away money for our retirement. Or she put the cereal boxes. Or she put books, which means she put books back on the shelf. Another phrasal verb is put off, means to postpone, to leave it for some other time. Example: we asked the boss to put off the meeting until tomorrow, to postpone the meeting until tomorrow. And another example: please put it off for another day, which means that we asked him to put it off for another day. Put on. Put on, to put clothes on the body. Examples: I put on a sweater and a jacket, which means I put them on quickly. Put on your coat. And the last example: I'll have to put my glasses on. And the last phrasal verb is put out, which means to extinguish, normally a fire. Example: the firefighters put out the house fire before it could spread, means that they put it out quickly. Well, we are still on learning some separable phrasal verbs. The first one on the list for you is to read through, which means to check for mistakes. Example: I read my essay through again before handing it in, before submitting it. Set up means to arrange, to begin. Example: the company has set up a new branch in Wales. Next example: my wife set up the living room exactly the way she wanted it. Exactly the way she wanted it. And the last example: she set it up. Notice that when we use the preposition, then the phrasal verb has to be separated. Take down, which means to make a written note. Example: these are your instructions. Write them down before you forget. Next, take off means to remove clothing. Example: it was so hot that I had to take off my shirt. The next example: come in and take your coat off. Next phrasal verb is talk over, means to discuss it among yourself or to discuss it among ourselves. Example: we have serious problems here. Let's talk them over like adults. Next, throw away, to discard. Example: there is a lot of money. Don't just throw it away. And the last phrasal verb here is try on, which means to put clothing on to see if it fits. Examples: she tried on 15 dresses before she found one she liked. She tried on 15 dresses before she found one she liked. And the next example: can I try these jeans on, please? Now here is our last slide on some common separable phrasal verbs that cannot be separated. The first one is try out, which means to test. Example: I tried out 4 cars before I could find one that pleased me. So we can also say I tried 4 cars out. So you can see how the phrasal verb can be separated. Next one, turn down, which means lower volume in this example. 2 examples for you. The first one is: your radio is driving me crazy. Please turn it down. Next example: turn the television down. And another meaning for this phrasal verb is reject. To turn something down means to reject. Examples: why did you turn that job down? Why did you reject it? Next example: he applied for a promotion twice this year, but he was turned down both times. Next phrasal verb here is turn up, which means the opposite of turn down, to raise the volume. Grandpa couldn't hear, so he turned up his hearing aid. And the next phrasal verb is to turn off. Normally to turn off, to switch off electricity. Examples: he turned the TV off. Next example: we turned off the lights before anyone could see us. We have turn off here, but with a different meaning. To turn off means which means to repulse. Example: it was a disgusting movie. It really turned me off. Turn on, switch on the electricity, the opposite of turn off. Examples: turn on the CD player so we can dance. Another example: turn the lights on. Now the last phrasal verb, the last separable phrasal verb on this list is use up, which means to exhaust, to use completely. Example: the gang members used up all the money and went out to rob some more banks. The gang members used up all the money and went out to rob some more banks.